When you think of a treasure hunter, who comes to mind? For most of us, we go to swashbuckling pirates like Blackbeard or the fictional Captain Jack Sparrow. For others who live near the beach, maybe it's the kooky older guy with the metal detector walking up and down the shore. For betting enthusiasts, perhaps it's the degenerate gambler, the caffeine-fueled insomniac grinding away for hours at the poker table, hoping to land a big pot. But arguably the most important treasure hunter, and undoubtedly the most intriguing, is someone most of you probably never heard of: Tommy Thompson, a marine engineer from the landlocked state of Indiana. And the reason he's been under the radar for so long is because, well, he spent over a decade in jail for refusing to reveal the location of his most prized find, one of the most lucrative shipwrecks in history, the SS Central America. As of January 2025, Thompson has been held in contempt of court since December of 2015. And every day since then, he's accrued a $1,000 fine for every day he has refused to cooperate in sharing the location of nearly 500 gold coins that have been valued at $2.5 million. Those fines, as of today, total $3.3 million. The story of Tommy Thompson and his lost treasure, at least lost to us, is straight out of an 80s adventure film. A brilliant underdog mind against extreme wealth and a man on the run from financial and legal systems, all set against a backdrop of the dangerous world of deep sea salvaging. In a case like this, we'll try to answer the question that people have been asking for years: who does this treasure really belong to? And for those who are looking to break the monotony of a 9-to-5, can I make a living as a treasure hunter? Unfortunately for Thompson, that career path took him from a celebrated discoverer to a prison cell. But what could possess a man to dedicate his life to such a mission? Surely one doesn't simply come out of the womb looking for hidden treasures. Or do they? Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about the missing treasure of Tommy Thompson. This is a really weird story that I'm excited to talk about and excited to kick off the new year with. I appreciate your all support as the channel kicked up in this new phase last year, and hopefully it continues even more so into 2026. So if this story sounds interesting to you, stick around after the ad as we talk about some missing treasure. It's the new year, and most people use the new year as an excuse to start on new goals. Losing weight, saving money, getting ahead of their schedule. But I'm here to tell you, you can start taking your health seriously anytime, thanks to today's sponsor, AG1. That's because AG1 is the easy one-step drink that supports everything from digestive regularity to your energy to your immune defense and a healthy mood. So I'll be ready to take on whatever 2026 has in store for me, which if it's anything like 2025, that would be a lot, in a good way. Mostly. AG1 is a resolution that's easy to stick with because, as mentioned earlier, it's one simple step. All you need is 8 to 12 ounces of water and a spoonful of AG1 and you're good to go. AG1 has over 75 ingredients, including probiotic strains, multivitamins, multiminerals. But I can just tell you from my own experience that it's helped me feel better. No longer do I get tired midway through the day and I have the energy to do things like exercise. It's not that AG1's some miracle cure, it's just putting the things into your body that your body's been looking for. Not to mention that AG1 and its multiple flavors is a perfect way to start your day. Now on top of AG1, you can get AGZ, which is the perfect way to end your day, as it has several ingredients to help you fall asleep and then stay there. So if you're looking at starting this year off right, then now's the perfect time. That's because if you head to the link in the description at drinkag1.com/Wendigang, along with your order of AG1, you'll get 3 free AG1 travel packs, 3 free AGZ travel packs, a bottle of vitamin D3 and K2, and a welcome kit. That includes things like a metal canister, a shaker bottle, and more. That's right. To get in on all of this with your first order, head to the link in the description at drinkag1.com/Wendigang to get in on this incredible offer today. Thank you all for watching the ad. Thank you to AG1 for sponsoring the channel. Their link will be in the description, and we're back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. Thomas Gregory Thompson was born on April 15th, 1952, which was coincidentally the 40th anniversary of the Titanic sinking. It seems like it was already preordained that he would have a deep fascination the ocean and sunken ships. After Thompson was born, he moved from Indiana to Defiance, a city in northwest Ohio. The youngest of 4 children, Thompson was fond of science books and popular mechanics magazines. Both of his parents were extremely smart. His father was an engineer and his mother was a nutritionist. Tommy's curiosity and love for exploration began early, as both parents remember him, quote, playing with tinker toys well into the night. Thompson grew up constantly building or fixing something, and if he wasn't doing either, then he was tearing something down so he could rebuild it. When Thompson was 8, He almost got his parents in trouble with the phone company because he had split the phone wire into 2 lines and connected the second line to a jewelry box, building himself a telephone. Think about what you were building when you were 8. Probably stupid little Lincoln logs or Legos, and try not to feel bad about yourself. By the time he was 10 years old, he could fix all the appliances in the house. And in high school, he built a lawnmower that had 4 engines. Once he could finally keep them running all at once, it took him only 20 minutes to mow the grass. Which I understand modifying 1 engine, but why do you need 4? What is he preparing for? But as comfortable as Thompson was tinkering on land, he loved being underwater. Thompson would often practice holding his breath and often challenged his friends to breath holding contests. As a teenager, Thompson hung around a group of like-minded kids his age who referred to themselves as the Vigilantes. Thompson was nicknamed Harvey the Hobo due to his traveling all around town. The name stuck, and to Thompson's buddies, he was just Harvey. And as Thompson's friends bought regular cars, Thompson, quote, dropped $400 on a cream-colored amphibious vehicle, the same kind used by James Bond in Thunderball. Despite being over 500 miles away from the nearest ocean, Thompson enrolled at the Ohio State University with dreams of being a marine engineer. Ironically, Ohio State didn't offer courses in marine engineering, so Thomas decided on the next closest thing and pursued mechanical engineering. Fortunately, his advisor, Don Glower, the school's dean of mechanical engineering, was a marine engineer, and the two were able to design a special 5-year program for Thompson. This program was mechanical engineering with a specialty in marine design. Some of the courses included in his program were aquatic microbiology, corrosion sciences, and marine geology. With the help of his advisor, Thompson became the first engineering student at Ohio State University to attend his school's lab for marine biology, which was on Lake Erie. He would drive his amphibious car in and out of the lake to the surprise of onlookers. One of his advisors praised Thompson for his fearlessness and remarked that he was, quote, willing to go places where no one else had gone and try things no one else had tried. In 1971, Thompson's dreams started to become reality, as he spent the year in Key West working with the famed treasure hunter Mel Fisher to search for the elusive Spanish galleon Nuestra Senora de Atocha. Thompson later joined another famous treasure hunter, John During, to search for the La Concepcion, a vessel that had sunk in 1961 off the coast of the Dominican Republic, reportedly carrying 150 tons of silver. While Thompson worked with these career treasure hunters in Florida, he learned of the many sunken ships all over the world. According to narratively, these ships carried, quote, more gold than could ever be spent. However, unfortunately for Thompson, this was the early 70s, so technological limits, along with a lack of information, meant finding, let alone acquiring the hidden treasures these ships contained, was next to impossible. Thompson relished the challenge of finding one of these wrecks. During his expeditions with Fisher and During in shallow reef waters, Thompson began to think of the kind of technology he would need to recover shipwrecks from the deep ocean floor. He thought if he could successfully descend thousands of feet, sift delicately through the remains of an ancient ship, and bring back her treasures unmarred, he had the means to do almost anything. Fish, farm, mine, drill, recover, test, explore. Possibilities were endless. The Buttle Memorial Institute in Columbus, which did contract work for the U.S. Department of Defense. During his time at Buttle, Thompson helped create technology that allowed the U.S. government to recover information from a Soviet nuclear submarine. Don Frink, Thompson's boss, recalled him being smart, ambitious, and willing to work hard. However, Frink believed Thompson was too wrapped up in his own ideas, maybe a little too smart or ambitious for his own good. The mark of a true entrepreneur. It's also clear to me that Thompson was a prodigy from a young age and had these aspirations for more throughout his life. So yeah, I'm sure his boss, who is trying to get him to do specific jobs for the company, is going to say he's not great at that because Thompson wants to do so much more. Or maybe his boss thought he wasn't a great employee because he saw the signs of someone who thought himself capable of outsmarting the legal system. At Battelle, Thompson was quickly tasked to work on deep ocean mining concepts and looked for ways to access deep sea depths. Thompson soon realized that the technology needed for this type of access would be too costly to build to justify the value of the minerals harvested from the ocean floor. In other words, the rig that would need to be invented to go that deep Would it make sense if you were just harvesting minerals? And since new technology was the key to success for deep ocean mining, he needed something more valuable than rocks. What he needed was sunken treasure to make the whole expedition worthwhile. And because of that, what he really needed was a first mate to help him get those streams off the ground and into the ears of investors to fund this technology. So, enter Bob Evans.
Bob Evans, down on the farm.
No, not the microwave meal Bob Evans. Probably. Thompson and Evans met a few years earlier in 1978. They had met during a winter storm that raged in Columbus, Ohio. Thompson was huddled up with his future ex-wife in her apartment when her heat went out. Thompson went to her next-door neighbor for help, who turned out to be Bob Evans, a man who later became a trusted partner in his quest for deep-sea exploration. So, I guess the marriage was good for something. Evans, who had also graduated from Ohio State, albeit with a degree in geology, became fast friends with Thompson, who regaled Evans with his stories of treasure hunting in Florida. Evans was fascinated, and being an amateur historian himself, the two would drink tequila and bourbon on Evans' front porch and talk of treasure hunting and history. Thompson eventually shared his idea of treasure hunting historic shipwrecks. But the big question, however, was which one? Like I said earlier, there was a ton of documented shipwrecks that had a ton of treasure on them, but most of the wreck locations were either unknown or far too difficult to get to. Well, the two men considered several shipwrecks, such as the Republic, a luxury liner that sank off the coast of Nantucket in 1909. It was rumored that its passengers carried millions of gold coins, but that was never officially documented. They also looked into the San Jose. A Spanish galleon sunk off the coast of Colombia by the British, but a wreck in sovereign waters meant they had to ask a foreign government for permission and probably do some convincing. And the government probably won't be convinced if the only reason you want to do it is to take all the money. They also considered the Titanic, probably the most famous shipwreck known to mankind, but ultimately passed due to its many legal protections, as the wreck is primarily a memorial site. And also, they didn't know the specifics of it in the 70s like we do now, but that thing is way down there. Insert joke about the Titanic expedition here. While other deep ocean treasure hunters may launch headfirst into a mission solely based on the value of its cargo, Thompson's scientific approach to an expedition of this scale meant he and Evans had to answer a few key questions. Is there a historical record establishing that the vessel went down while her hold carried valuable cargo? Can the place of the vessel sinking be approximately located? These were the questions Thompson and Evans had to answer, but most importantly, they had to decide if the condition of the ocean floor at the site was conducive to a successful salvage operation. For example, if the sediment that the potential shipwreck set on was too deep, it'd be buried before Thompson could dig the ship out. Not to mention, if the ocean currents were too strong, a remotely operated underwater vehicle equipped with cameras would be difficult, if not impossible to control. In other words, there was a lot that could go wrong. But, based on their criteria, Thompson and Evans finally decided on a shipwreck that checked all their boxes: the SS Central America. On March 15th of 1848, the California newspaper ran a headline titled "Gold Mine Found." The California gold rush was in full swing, and at the time sleepy settlement of San Francisco watched its population boom from 459 people to almost 25,000 by the end of 1849. As people rushed to the west to seek their fortune, shipping lanes were established to carry passengers and supplies into California, while gold was transported back to the East Coast. The SS Central America was a key vessel during this time, and as one of the new classes of steamships that were built in 1852, the ship was launched the following year. So the SS Central America ferried people and products from the Panamanian port of what is now Columbia to New York, and it was said to have carried, quote, 1/3 of all gold shipped during the California gold rush from California to New York. All in all, the ship completed 43 voyages in her 4 years of operation before sinking in the fall of 1857. That's because on September 3rd of 1857, the Central America departed Panama with nearly 500 passengers and around 100 crew members. The ship was ready to embark on its usual 9-day trip through the Caribbean and up the East Coast. Many of its passengers had come from the SS Sonora in San Francisco, newly rich with gold, and were returning home with their fortune for good. People would go out to California for a while, make their money, and then travel back east. Well, by the time they transferred over to the Central America, the ship carried gold totaling around $1.6 million, which in 1988, at the time Thompson and Evans were thinking about finding the ship, was worth about $21 million. This also excludes passenger gold, for which many people brought their own shipments. Coins and gold bars, which were called ingots, ranged in size from squares less than half a pound to building blocks that weighed over 60 pounds. Think of your stereotypical solid brick of gold. The ship had a ton of those. You know, kind of like bricks that are used for building houses, or like the brick Kevin threw at the bandits in Home Alone. Only if Kevin had thrown a gold brick at them, Kevin would be charged with manslaughter. Because, you know, those things are pretty heavy. Now, the SS Central America made a stopover in Cuba on Tuesday, September 8th. Clear skies and calm seas greeted them, and all aboard expected an ordinary trip back to New York. However, the condition changed drastically the next day. In just 48 hours, the ship was in the middle of a hurricane nearly 200 miles east of Savannah, Georgia. By Friday, furious winds pulverized the ship, and relentless ocean waves the size of mountains broke, quote, so high over the bow of the ship that each side wheel was completely submerged. Chief Engineer George Ashby realized the side wheel problem would eventually doom the vessel. While being pounded by gale force winds, crew members were thrown off balance trying to deliver a wheelbarrow of coal to the engines, because if the engines weren't fired, the side wheels would cease to turn, and they would not be able to keep the bow of the ship facing the waves. Passengers aboard, quote, attempted a 30-hour non-stop bucket brigade to keep the ship afloat, but the engines flooded and the storm ripped apart masts and sails. On the evening of September 12, 1857, the SS Central America sank and took down 425 victims with it. Only 153 passengers survived, predominantly the women and children. Overall, 425 people perished in the disaster that was believed to have happened about 160 miles off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. When rescue operations across the Atlantic came to help, they discovered that the survivors still treading water would not let go of their gold. As a result, the lifeboats could carry only so many passengers at once, as their heavy weight made it impossible for the rowers to bear. The choice was clear: ditch your gold and hope to survive, or cling to it and sink into a watery grave. The horrific tragedy was considered the era's Titanic, and, quote, the loss in gold was so profound that it was one of the factors precipitating the Great Panic financial crisis of 1857. That's right, this ship had so much gold on it that when it sank, it directly led to a financial crisis. At the time, the US banking system relied heavily on the gold standard, as all money was backed, quite literally, by the same amount in gold. Well, that sounds like a great idea. I wonder why we quit doing that. American Standard Gold, the world's leading advisory firm for precious metals, wrote that, quote, in late summer of 1857, cracks in the financial system were already evident. A prominent Ohio to New York financial house failed, railroad securities wobbled, and confidence in the value of the dollar thinned. So all of that gives us backstory to how the SS Central America went down and why its treasure was so coveted. And Thompson's confidence in finding the Central America was at an all-time high. See, no one at the time had found the wreckage yet, but that wasn't going to stop him. Because it sank in US waters, there would be no international entanglements. There was a detailed manifest of the cargo with accurate navigational records, so there would be an approximate location of where it went down. Also, all the heavy iron used to power the ship would be perfect for sonar detection. And then, of course, there was all that gold. Central America was sought after by other treasure hunters, with at least 6 previous expeditions having failed before Thompson. Thompson needed to work fast before a competitor launched another expedition, and instead of taking a treasure hunting approach like Fisher did with the Atocha in 1976, Thompson took a scientific one. Finding the Central America would be a challenge. Quote, proportionally, it would be like finding a single grain of sand in the floor plan of a 4-bedroom house. To pinpoint a more manageable area for the search, Bob Evans made a compilation of accounts of the sinking, mostly from news stories that were published in 1857. He pored over passenger and crew accounts and worked with Lawrence D. Stone, a search theory expert who was famous for recovering the US nuclear submarine Scorpion in the late 60s. So Stone used data to create computerized models of possible sinking scenarios based on coordinates, wind speed, and the direction of the hurricane. The result was a search grid almost the size of Rhode Island. And again, they're looking for one boat in the midst of that. Each square of the grid was given a number, and the higher the number, the greater the chance that the Central America would be in that spot. So Thompson pitched his plan to Columbus's wealthy class. This would be a multi-million-dollar expedition, and he would need funding. Now, Thompson's appearance made him an oddity in these wealthy circles. With his thrift store suit and unkempt hair, his presence was a bewilderment to those high-powered investors in their upper-floor offices and elegant conference rooms. But despite his look, Thompson was charismatic, and he had a unique ability to convey the science behind his wild ideas in a way that made them seem possible. He was also realistic, bringing up the low probability of success and, quote, outlined various contingencies, emphasizing that the mission offered the chance for investors to participate in a journey of good old American discovery. And the tactic worked. Thompson inspired confidence in these investors who relished the delight of the project. One of the investors, D. Wayne Ashby, said, quote, the concept seemed pretty far out, but I was certain of his credibility. The financial gain of the pitch was this. $50,000 investment could be worth more than $1.5 million. Thompson's lawyer, Keith Golden, which, first of all, the treasure hunter's lawyer is named Keith Golden. Just had to point that out. Keith Golden is the treasure hunting attorney for Tommy Thompson with his best friend Bob Evans. You know, I've never met any of these people. This whole story could just be a joke. Someone could have put all this on the internet just to mess with me. And you know what? It worked. But it makes me happy, so who's the real winner? Keith Golden had documents signed by the investors, which clearly stated that there was a possibility of getting nothing from this mission. Oddly enough, some of the investors embraced this. One investor even famously wrote, "Bye-bye" on the memo line of the check he handed to Thompson. Which, yeah, that's funny and all. He's acting like the money's going bye-bye. But I feel like writing bye-bye on a check does not legally hold up in court to say you're removing yourself from the investment. But I guess we'll find out when we get to the court part of this. In 2 years, Thompson and Evans raised $12.7 million from 161 backers. After an additional investment round increased the total to $22 million, they had enough to pay for a ship, a crew, and equipment to reach the ocean floor. Thompson established 2 companies from which the money flowed: Recovery Limited Partnership, which Thompson used to solicit investors to back the venture, and Columbus America Discovery Group, which was the operating company Thompson used to organize personnel and material for the salvage. As you can imagine, you need a lot of people and a lot of supplies to try to get that ship and the gold in it off the ocean floor. With strong financial backing, Thompson could finally build the perfect search vessel, which he aptly named Nemo. Weighing 7 tons, the remotely operated vehicle could withstand even the harshest of deep ocean conditions. Before this expedition, the deepest these types of submersibles had reached was 6,600 feet. Plus, they all had only one arm, which was limited to rudimentary functions. Nemo had multiple arms, as well as cameras, so that scientists could explore the wreck and perform numerous tasks required for the ship's recovery. So in June of 1986, the mission to find the SS Central America was officially launched. And almost immediately, they had problems. Quote, seasickness, short tempers, errant weather, malfunctioning equipment, and for a stretch of time, the only food served was fried chicken. Which I don't know if that last part's really that big of a problem. It seems more a matter of opinion. Like, was it McDonald's chicken nugget fried chicken, or was it like Cane's fried chicken? Because that would not be a bad thing. The biggest conflict, though, was between Thompson and Mike Williamson, who was brought on the expedition to utilize his state-of-the-art sonar device. Both men had different ideas on how to tackle the search area. By early fall, more than a month since they launched, the crew had only scanned about half the grid. But to Williamson, one sonar ping stood out. A large, dark shadow in the middle of an image which looked like a paddle wheel. Williamson was convinced, so much so that he named this target Side Wheel. Because, you know, as mentioned earlier, the SS Central America had these giant side wheels, so Williamson sarcastically refers to the ping that he found as the side wheel because he's convinced it's the side wheel. The team scanned the site numerous times, but Thompson wanted to move on. He wanted to, quote, complete the entire search grid and the areas that had not yet been covered. Because of this, the two men clashed. Crew members claim Williamson was, quote, shaking with rage, blue veins popping out of his neck. Thompson insisted on searching the larger area. For him, it was more than just finding gold. In his book, America's Lost Treasure, Thompson regarded, quote, the Central America as a time capsule, filled not only with treasure, but with artifacts of an era in which the spirit of America blossomed. Thompson wanted to unearth a lost, hidden world of not only gold, but history and marine science. Which, that's cool and all, but I mean, how much time does it take to check out, like, this one spot? If you see a shadow and the sonar expert who you hired to be a part of the crew is telling you it looks like the side of the SS Central America, I mean, you have the submersible right there. Just send it down and check it out. You could turn this entire expedition into like a 1-month thing. All that talk of, oh, this is like a capsule of America, that's great and all. Why don't we open the capsule where the ship is? I say this with conviction as if I have any idea what I'm talking about. As if I'm a qualified person to say, yeah, that shadow was definitely the ship. I'm not just a stupid YouTuber. I know sonar equipment if I had to under certain circumstances, if someone showed me how. According to his lawyer, again, Keith Golden, the treasure was only a means to an end for Thompson's true passion, deep sea exploration. But for many of Thompson's investors who initially funded this mission for the experience alone, something had shifted. The $50,000 initial investment they had assumed would lead nowhere was now expected to get a return of around $1.5 million, which means now people that paid $50,000 to advance science and exploration were expecting a payday. By 1988, word had spread that Thompson and his crew were getting close to finding the Central America. Time was of the essence, and with 6 previous expeditions that ultimately failed, the Central America was undoubtedly a popular target for treasure hunters. Thompson worried there'd be more on the way, and with all that gold it carried, his team had to hurry before another crew could come in and steal their score. This time crunch was also a contributing factor in ending the power struggle between Thompson and Williamson, who both had differing ideas on how the team should search the area. The team had to move on and search the entire grid rather than focus on a specific section. Williams had to concede, as he was not only hired for his sonar equipment, but had also struck a deal with Thompson. In exchange for 1.975% of the gold, Williamson agreed to keep the sonar results a secret. That way, if they did come across a ping that might be the ship, Williamson can't tell anyone until Thompson and his crew check it out for themselves. Also, 1.975 may sound like a weird percentage, but you got to realize these percentages were promised to a ton of people, so I'm sure they were all broken up like this. And that 0.025% difference between 1.975 and 2% could be the equivalent of like $1 million. Unable to walk away from the expedition, Williamson had no other choice but to continue with Thompson and the team as they searched the rest of the grid. In the late summer of 1988, 2 years after finding Sidewheel, keep in mind these expeditions can take a long time, the crew ran their search aboard a new ship, a retrofitted icebreaker named Arctic Discoverer, over an area nicknamed Galaxy 2. The incoming fall storms caused the Atlantic Ocean to get rough, and because of that, things got tense on board. 20-foot waves pounded the ship, and winds kicked up as high as 35 knots. At 11:30 a.m. on September 11th, Thompson sent Nemo, their underwater submersible, down to the bottom of the Galaxy 2 site. Nemo was shaped like a small shipping container, outfitted with 18 computers and 12 monitors. It weighed in at about 12,000 pounds, and it had, quote, mechanical arms, broadcast quality video cameras, spotlights, strobe lights, thrusters, and excavation tools. Everything required to trawl 8,000 feet below the surface, searching for sparkles of gold in the nightmarish dark. The crew ate their lunch as Nemo drifted down to the ocean floor, which took around 90 minutes. When the crew got back to work, they scanned the monitors for images relayed by their submersible. At first, they, quote, saw a plate, then a bottle, and then a large shadow in the left corner of one of the screens. Thompson couldn't believe what he saw. A big rusty paddle wheel buried in some sediment. It took 5 years to finally find what he'd been looking for. As Nemo made its way around the paddle wheel, the dust finally settled, and the picture it sent back to Thompson and his crew were beyond their wildest dreams. According to Thompson, the bottom was carpeted with gold. It looked like a golden runway. In the images, the crew saw piles of shimmering gold bricks, some stacked on top of each other, others resting at an angle. Coins sparkled along the floor, but the wildest sight of all was the 30-foot tall pile of the prized ore. For Thompson and Evans, those years of drinking on the porch, planning, pitching, and enduring the elements, both nature and man-made, paid off. Thompson invited the investors to the Columbus Athletic Club for a meeting. When they arrived, they were greeted with a display of just some of the treasure that had been recovered. 2 gold coins, a 25-pound bar of gold inside an aquarium tank filled with water, and a 300-pound solid bronze bell. This last item wasn't gold, but was a cool artifact from the SS Central America. The investors were thrilled, as you can imagine, and Thompson was met with a round of applause. I mean, could you imagine if you gave a guy $50,000 and then he came back from the ocean 5 years later and was like, hey, we found a lot of gold. One of the investors, Donald Dunn, said in a speech, quote, "I don't know whether you're really going to find any more gold, but whether you do or not, I want you to know it's been a privilege and a pleasure to have been on this journey with you." And more gold Thompson would find. Over the next 3 summers, Thompson would pull more gold from the seabed each visit. Quote from Popular Mechanics, by 1991, his team had brought up 7,500 gold coins, more than 20 pounds of gold dust and nuggets, and 532 ingots that weighed close to 60 pounds. Or for those keeping track at home, millions and millions of dollars. And as for the man himself, Tommy Thompson became a celebrity. He was featured in People magazine, which called him a genius who could fix a rocket ship with 2 paper clips and a piece of twine. But underneath his newfound status, Thompson developed an incurable paranoia. Would someone try to take his gold? Well, as for that gold, when the first haul was brought ashore, it, quote, went straight into armored cars by guards carrying machine guns amidst cheering investors, well-wishers, and descendants of survivors of the Central America shipwreck. In addition to gold, that initial haul also brought trouble for Thompson. He was immediately sued by, quote, no less than 114 separate entities, including 39 insurance companies that had insured the cargo on the original Central America voyage. Which, yeah, you find the gold down there, a bunch of people who didn't say anything prior are going to suddenly have a stake in it. It's also just funny that back in the 1850s, these insurance companies had policies for the cargo that was on the ship. And then like 130 years later, when it's found, the insurance companies rise from the grave. Like, it's clearly there in the fine print, that gold is mine, thank you. These entities argued that since they paid claims in 1857, they were entitled to the recovered gold. One of the more perplexing lawsuits was from an order of Capuchin monks who accused Thompson of stealing information that was given to the monks by a Columbia University professor they had contracted to do sonar research in the same area as the expedition. Which that is objectively funny. There's a group of monks who hired a sonar guy to check out the area, and then when you find the gold, the monks sue you because the guy they hired, they think, gave you the information. The judge eventually dismissed the monk's case, but that's such a funny line. But Thompson's other legal battles persisted until 1998, when a U.S. District Court judge in Virginia finally ruled in Thompson's favor, giving 92.5% of the recovered gold to him. But the court also ruled that these 39 insurance companies were the representing parties that had claims to the gold on the original voyage, not Thompson's investors. How the judge came to this ruling was based on the law of salvage and the law of fines. The differences between the two are this. The law of fines can be simplified to its basic premise: finders keepers. For any treasure hunter to be awarded possession of a high-profile shipwreck, the key factor is abandonment, meaning that the finder must prove that the original owner has abandoned the ship. The finder must also establish, quote, intent to acquire the property and take actual possession or control of it. Because of the law of fines, this fosters potential treasure hunters to act quietly and hide their recoveries to prevent claims from previous owners that could strip the finders of any treasure. While the law of fines focuses on title and possession, the law of salvage emphasizes the preservation of property and fair compensation. If a finder saves sunken property, then they should be properly paid for their efforts. They, in turn, become salvers who do not own the property that is recovered or saved, whether from piracy, storms, or other elements, and are compensated by a salvage award. So if the ship was completely lost and there was no insurance and there was no paperwork anywhere giving claim to the cargo of the ship, then it's finders keepers. If Thompson finds it, he gets to do with it whatever he wants. But because there were steps made to ensure there was value for the lost cargo, and in the event of a wreck, there was compensation from the insurance company, then therefore the wreck has not truly been abandoned. So instead of finding it, what Thompson really did was salvage it. So he gets an award for the salvage, but it's not that the gold he found was his. Instead, he basically gets a bounty for finding it. Now, because it was so hard to find and had been gone for so long, it was a pretty hefty bounty of 92.5%, but as you could imagine, that's not great news for Thompson's investors. Ultimately, this was what was awarded to Thompson and the Columbus America Discovery Group: exclusive salvage rights and the 92.5% of the recovered gold. The remaining percentage would go to the various insurance companies of the Central America. The key factor in the decision was the degree to which Thompson worked to protect, quote, the historical and archaeological value of the wreck and items salvaged. It was Thompson's deep-sea exploration from a scientific and historic approach, rather than just another money-hungry treasure hunter, that helped him in court. As for the contract between Thompson and his investors, the stipulation was that he would only receive around 17% of the proceeds from future sales. With the insurance companies out of the way, the investors believed they were going to become extraordinarily rich because of the 92%, or so they thought. See, by now, the relationship between the investors and Thompson had soured. Meetings and updates had become less frequent. Thompson, whose transparency was a point of interest for investors initially, seemed to withdraw into a shell. One investor said to Columbus Monthly that Columbus America Discovery Group was, quote, playing their cards pretty close to the vest, and it ain't my vest. As for Thompson, who had not foreseen the onslaught of legal trouble, this experience strained him. In 1991, he had to put the recovery efforts on hold. Now, gold didn't dip as a result of this, but while Thompson was held up in court and therefore unable to take his gold to market, the rare coin market started to slide. By 1998, the same year Thompson published his book about the search, America's Lost Treasure, his recovered gold was valued at around $100 million. This sounds like a ton, right? Until you realize that years prior, before the market slid, it was valued around $400 million. So the value of it was cut down to a quarter of what it once was because Thompson was unable to sell it in the midst of all the court disputes. Thompson was also facing difficulties in his personal life. A lengthy divorce, coupled with the death of his father, halted recovery efforts for the rest of the gold. And again, he was given exclusive salvage rights, so no one else can get to it either, just has to sit there. I mean, it's been sitting there for like 140 years, so it's probably fine, but still, it's frustrating. Like the sunken ship, he was under extreme pressure. By 1992, Thompson's company had spent more than, quote, $30 million on salvaging, running the business, and legal fees, as Thompson attempted to balance his obligation to his crew, his companies, and his investors while being a dad to 3 kids. As someone who meticulously pored over data and research in his expeditions, Thompson was naturally obsessed with showing up to every court hearing for the lawsuits, especially since it was regarding who the gold belonged to. And as you can imagine, this legal case was one of a kind, so it took a long time for everyone to sort this out. Despite his distaste for the nature of these legal battles, he was as every bit involved with them as his lawyers were. Thompson read every page of every brief and had a hand in writing them as well. For Thompson to pay his investors, he had to sell the treasure. In 2000, Thompson and Evans negotiated with the California Gold Marketing Group to sell a majority of their haul to gold and coin dealers for a total of $52 million. This was a shock to investors, as Thompson didn't inform them until after the sale was finished. The investors pressed Thompson for their share, but he allegedly told them they would receive nothing. All the money, according to him, went to pay off loans and legal fees that accrued since the expedition began. Among the gold sold were 5,000 commemorative restrike coins from some of the Central America's gold bars. In place of the profit from the sale of the gold, instead, Thompson decided to receive 500 of these coins as his payment. This was due to a recently amended agreement between Recovery Limited and Columbus American Discovery Group, which, remember, Thompson was the head of both companies. And conveniently, people can't be coming for his percentage of the profits if his only profit was commemorative gold coins. Which, by the way, the value of these 500 coins was around $2.5 million. When word traveled back to the investors about Thompson's gold coins, 2 of them sued Thompson, along with Mike Williamson and 12 other sonar technicians. Which, I get suing Thompson, but it's funny to just grab the sonar guys in the lawsuit. Like, I know you're part of this. You're all in on it. They saw through Thompson's loophole with getting his payment in gold coins, and they wanted profit from those 500 coins. To sort out the whole mess, a U.S. District Court judge in 2006, quote, ordered Thompson to submit an inventory of the gold as part of the civil lawsuits against him. Not only did Thompson fail to submit one, but he refused to provide a full account of the gold for 6 years. Over these 6 years, Thompson drew away from the public eye. Perhaps due to the unyielding cat-and-mouse legal battles and trial tactics from lawyers, Thompson was simply worn down. Much like his relationship with his investors, Thompson became unreachable and stopped responding to calls, and he eventually stopped appearing in court altogether. Thompson soon left the Midwest and spent most of his time living in Florida under another name, keeping away from the public eye, especially the press. Thompson was under what is known as the Plague of Gold, a legendary term referring to the cruel turn of fortune that occurs when there's a discovery of buried treasure. You know, kind of like the Curse of the Black Pearl from the first Pirates of the Caribbean. Only instead of becoming skeleton people, you just don't show up to court, which that's really the same thing, if you think about it. In 2008, Thompson was arrested in Jacksonville after a sheriff saw him hiding something during a traffic stop. Thompson was trying to cover up a trove of, quote, fake IDs, 4 cell phones, and $6,500 in cash. Once again, like the 4 engines on the lawnmower, what is he planning? The items painted a broad picture of someone who desperately did not want to be found, as the various identities might have been used for multiple bank accounts. The cash would come in handy for quick transactions on transportation and motel rooms without suspicion. He was likely a multimillionaire who was living out of his car. In 2012, Thompson was ordered to appear in court, either with the coins or to swear under oath that he didn't know their location. As you could imagine, Thompson never showed. While this strategy might have worked with investors, the court's judge did not respond well to Thompson's withdrawal. As a result, the judge held Thompson in criminal contempt of court and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Thompson was now branded a fugitive and U.S. Marshals were tasked with hunting him down. This story is so fascinating and high stakes on paper. This treasure hunter gets money from investors and finds a shipwreck full of gold, and then the courts brand him a fugitive and the marshals are trying to find him. But then you look into it and he just got kind of depressed and decided to skip court, and now they very lazily have to go arrest him. In 2013, with Thompson on the run, a judge appointed a Columbus lawyer, Ira Kane, to continue recovery efforts of the Central America. Since, all that gold's still down there and Thompson's not getting to it anytime soon. So Kane contracted a company, the Odyssey Marine Exploration, to bring the rest of the gold up so that investors could get paid. Bob Evans, Thompson's former partner, acted as the chief scientist overseeing the operation. Thompson, wherever he was at this point, was forced to watch from afar as the renewed expedition, which launched in April of 2014, brought up more than 45 gold bars, 15,500 coins, and, quote, hundreds of artifacts. Which good for them, but where in the world was Tommy Thompson? Some federal agents believed he was in Ohio, which had been his home base until the mid-2000s, but soon expanded their search to Florida, knowing that he lived there part-time. But Thompson had actually already moved there full-time in a rented mansion in Vero Beach with his administrative assistant, Allison Antekier, who was also rumored to be his girlfriend. The agents had difficulty tracing the two to the mansion, as Thompson had been paying the utilities under the landlord's name, which was Vance Brinkeroff, a real estate agent who went to college with Thompson. By the time U.S. Marshals finally discovered the residence, they were too late. Thompson had moved out. A handyman who worked on the property found some of his belongings, quote, 12 cell phones, each assigned for a different purpose, as well as a book, How to Be Invisible, which offered advice on protecting one's personal privacy. I wonder if the last page of the book is a mostly blank page that just says, don't leave this book behind, since doing that would kind of defeat the point of being invisible. The manhunt was led by U.S. Marshal Mike Straw, who relished the challenge of finding the scientist who himself had found a small ship in the middle of an enormous sea. Straw had been after Thompson for 2 years, but he was getting close. On January 27th, 2015, the hunt would finally come to an end. On that day, 62-year-old Tommy Thompson sat in his room in the Hilton Suites in Boca Raton. Rampant paranoia took its toll on Thompson's now sickly body, which was surrounded by fugitive paraphernalia. Quote, fake IDs, burner phones, voice-changing equipment, and information about which countries don't have extradition treaties with the United States. His companion, Antekier, would run errands in public in order to prevent Thompson from being recognized. And while this might sound paranoid, Thompson's fears weren't entirely unfounded. There were hundreds of wanted posters with his face plastered all over South Florida. In public, Antekier would enlist an almost cartoonish level of precautions, reportedly, quote, wearing big floppy hats and taking a succession of buses and taxis to lose anyone who might be on her tail. And as usual, when she arrived back at the hotel that day, she looked around to make sure she wasn't being followed. Two things. For one, that last sentence is funny because the only way we would know that is if she was in fact being followed. But I also like the idea that I get him being spotted because there's wanted posters everywhere, but the idea that normal people are going to be on the lookout for her, and also because of that, her strategy to not arouse suspicion is to wear overly suspicious disguises like giant hats. So if there's one thing that lets you blend into a crowd, it is wearing something that no one else in the crowd is wearing. But Agent Stroh and his team had followed her for 7 hours, which again probably tipped off by the giant hat. And when they raided the hotel, marshals found the couple hiding out with almost $430,000 in cash, along with information about storage units the couple had rented, a trash bag full of prescription medicine using fake names, expired U.S. Treasury check for $216,939, and registration wrappers for a trust in Belize. But the gold coins were nowhere to be found. At court in Florida, Thompson did everything he could to fight extradition from the state. At one point, he told the judge he was allergic to the weather up north. Furthermore, he told them he contracted a tropical illness from a mosquito bite in South America, and the climate only worsened his ailments. Despite Thompson's long-winded plea, or perhaps because of how ridiculous it sounded, the judge sent Thompson back up to Ohio, where he and Antikyre pleaded guilty to criminal contempt on April 8, 2015. Antikyre was given a fine of $5,000 and 2 months probation after serving 1 month in jail. Thompson was given a 2-year sentence for the contempt charge and a fine of $250,000. The two turned over the cash seized from the hotel room as part of their plea deal. And as part of the deal, Thompson signed an affidavit agreeing to reveal the location of the 500 gold coins. Now, if Thompson gave over the whereabouts of these coins, he would be released from prison after 2 years, as stipulated in the plea deal. Thompson agreed to sit for a debtor's examination to answer questions about the location of those 500 coins. But as you might have guessed, off of everything you've learned about him so far, Thompson refused to answer them. During one of these examinations, Thompson told authorities that he had a medical condition that prevented him from remembering where he stashed the coins. He remembers everything else about his entire life just fine, just not where the $2.5 million worth of coins are. Because, then he'd have to give some of that money to investors, and we can't have that. During his court hearings, Thompson would remember just about every detail in his answers about various cases other than the important one. Where's the gold? Thompson told the judge that they could give him a death sentence since he already told prosecutors and other authorities on the case everything he knew, which that's also incredibly dramatic. Hey, where's all that gold you're hiding? Just kill me. Do it. Shoot me in the head. Thompson's attorney was granted a request for his client to undergo a psychiatric evaluation to see if Thompson's failure to fulfill the terms of the plea agreement could be a result of his mental condition, specifically his memory. After the evaluation, it was determined that there was no evidence that Thompson's refusal to answer the question was the result of his mental health. Shocking. Thompson stonewalling the authorities did not help his situation. The gold that he believed would unlock his freedom to a life of discovery and exploration was now the key that locked him in a prison cell. Because he had not kept his end of the bargain in the plea deal, a different judge ordered him to pay a fine of $1,000 a day until he agreed to cooperate. Thompson was held in, quote, civil contempt of court, which is essentially a coercive measure that would keep Thompson in jail until he gives up the location of the coins. Normally, when you hear about someone being in contempt of court, it's because they are doing something to disrupt the courtroom or doing something to impede court proceedings. So normally, the judge just puts them in a holding cell while they're in contempt. And then after like an hour, they calm down or the thing goes away and they can get let out. But because he has to say where the coins went, because that is the money that he's hiding from investors that, got him this whole fugitive status in the first place, since he's not saying where the coins are, he is continuously in contempt. Thompson's 2-year sentence had now gone on for 3 years, as the court had put his criminal sentencing on hold until he resolved his civil contempt issue. As of 2020, Thompson's racked up more than $1.7 million in fines. And to this day, he has maintained that he doesn't know the location of those 500 coins. That is right. He is still, right now, in prison over contempt of court, that he could walk out of the jail at any second if he just said where the coins are. That is a decade of contempt to court. I didn't even know you could do that. He claims they were transferred to an irrevocable trust in Belize. Golden, Thompson's lawyer, confirmed that Belize's strict trust laws align with Thompson's statements. Quote, once a trust is established, the person who opened it can't access the assets if the manager of the trust, in this case, Bank in Belize, believe the person's under duress. Which, sure, that sounds good on paper and all, but there's a difference in being held at gunpoint and made to empty your bank account and being in contempt of court because you won't hand over the money. I guess they're technically both cases of getting robbed, but if the US government's the one doing the robbing, I'm sure Belize would be more than happy to say if they have the coins. During Antikyre's deposition, she informed authorities that she moved the coins from 2006 to 2010 at Thompson's direction without informing investors. At first, the coins were shipped from California to Jacksonville, Florida, where they were kept in a safe deposit box before they were transferred to a facility in Fort Lauderdale. Antikyre said that she believes that they were then eventually taken to Belize. The company that allegedly received the coins in Belize has no record of them, and no one can access the trust without a power of attorney signed by Thompson, which, you guessed it, he claims he cannot sign. Thompson's capture changed his reputation from a scientist hero to a rogue thief who bungled an opportunity to make himself, his crew, and his investors rich. But underneath a man who succumbed to Gollum's disease, this golden-laden tragedy has a silver lining. Thompson's mission down to the SS Central America was historic in its scientific accomplishments. The jerry-rigged submersible is now the standard practice for deep-sea expeditions, specifically how the robotic arms operate to preserve objects before extraction. For example, Nemo would carefully place a frame around a pile of cones and inject it with silicone. When solidified, this created a block that could be easily stored till it was ready to be brought up to the surface. The images captured and hours of video recorded help scientists study deep ocean life and new species, particularly deep-sea sponges that were examined for their anti-tumor properties. As for the retrieved coins and gold recovered during the 2014 Odyssey Marine expedition, the mission that took place without Thompson, they were auctioned and sold or put in public exhibits in Los Angeles and at an NRA convention in Dallas. Whatever gold or treasure Thompson hopes to find should he be released would only be what he stashed or sold and hid away from his partners. And for those initial investors, they would have to wait 33 years to eventually see a dime. While they weren't able to break even, more than $2 million had been distributed back to them, which meant they got some of their money back. And as for those 500 restrike coins, they would never see the light of day again, at least not at the time of recording. And remember, these investors knew what they signed up for. Remember the bye-bye written on the memo line of the check given to Thompson? And notably, only 2 out of the 100 plus investors actually sued Thompson. But for those investors, well, the fact that they're willing to pay for a 15-year lawsuit that costs at least 3 times the initial investment points to the fact that the money doesn't matter at this point. Thompson stole from them and then lied about it. They're sending the message that even in the unlikely chance Thompson recovers those 500 coins, he will certainly have no time to enjoy them, not even considering the fact that his fines in court are now more than the coins are worth. At his trial in November of 2018, new evidence revealed Thompson had a bank account in the Cook Islands that held more than $4 million, as well as stashed gold at the Central America wreck site that was presumed to be recovered later. Which, that's dedication. Stash your gold at the bottom of the ocean. It's just a shame it's the one spot in the bottom of the ocean that everyone's looking for gold in. And for the first time, Thompson publicly admitted that there was gold he hadn't told anyone about. He said that the gold was bait, using it to determine if somebody had been down there without authorization. Oh, that pile of gold I hid over there, that was a test. It was like a mousetrap of sorts, to see if anyone else would be stealing my gold from the bottom of the ocean. Thompson told the court that if he brought up that gold in 1991, the cash from that sale could have been given to the investors. But why not pay back the investors in the first place? Well, maybe that answer's somewhere in the psych evaluation. All we know for now is this: he was obsessed with being in control. And when Columbus America Discovery Group had used up its investment capital, it had to borrow money to keep the operation afloat, and at one point had to run up debts of more than $40 million. This, in addition to the legal battles with various insurance companies, caused him to suspend recovery operations, leaving more than 90% of the gold at the wreck site. Personal struggles, such as the death of his father and his own divorce, had caused him to become increasingly suspicious, and this heavily strained his relationship with the investors. When 2 of them sued, Thompson's paranoia took over, and none of them would ever see a dime. I'm sure it wasn't the dollar value that kept Thompson from giving any of them their money. It was the fact that he didn't want them to have it. And during Thompson's trial, in those 4.5 weeks, none of the investors showed up to give testimony, to complain, or even to observe. Most of them had died by then, and their children or grandchildren now were in charge of the investment. After the closing arguments from the attorneys, the jury had finally reached its verdict. Thompson owed a combined total of $19.4 million. The jury had felt that Thompson acted with no malice, so there were no punitive damages or court fees awarded to Thompson. Outside of the trial, the court of public opinion had already reached a verdict years ago. Thompson will never reveal the whereabouts of the gold coins, nor would he ever pay back the money that the courts say he owes. And whether those entities ultimately collect, time will tell. But in the meantime, there are options. They've been looking at offers from the expedition, including the previously mentioned silicone molds that once held gold coins, as well as jewelry, clothing, and even cigars that are perfectly fine to smoke today. According to Golden, Thompson's lawyer, these trinkets pale in comparison to the fortune these investors and insurance firms could have. He says that instead of suing Thompson, they should have let him finish the recovery of the Central America and stay on as partners for future missions. In fact, in the mid-90s, Thompson was in talks with the Colombian government to recover a ship whose cargo was estimated at a few $billion. But the deal eventually fell apart because of Thompson's legal woes. Which, yeah, all of that sounds good on paper if it wasn't for the fact when Thompson ran into legal trouble with the insurance companies, he shut down to everyone. Sure, if nothing ever went wrong and Thompson kept hauling up money, maybe then he would have gave it to the investors. But you can't trust Thompson as a business partner if, at the first sign of trouble, he just curls up in a turtle shell and hoards all the money. Especially considering that after he got in trouble for that, he just went on the Reddit and changed his name and lived in hotels for years. Not the kind of guy you want to run a multi-million-dollar operation with. The lawsuit from the sonar technicians was eventually dismissed with prejudice, which means they cannot sue Thompson in the future. A small win for Thompson, whose focus is now on appealing the verdict to diminish the payment or have it overturned altogether. Separate from the trial, Thompson has filed an appeal in federal court to be released from prison, based on federal statuses that limit imprisonment for uncooperative witnesses to 18 months, which I would argue this is not an uncooperative witness, but whatever. And on January 31st, 2025, quote, a U.S. District Court in Ohio terminated the civil contempt charge against Thompson, who must now serve out the rest of his 2-year criminal sentence, which is up in January of 2027. The judge rationalized that for 10 years, Thompson refused to give the gold's location and was convinced that further imprisonment would yield a different result. And when Thompson eventually completes his criminal sentencing, there's still the matter of facing millions of dollars in fines once he's released, not to mention lingering civil suits from other entities. So you heard that right, a year from now, Thompson will be getting out of jail. Since last January, the judge said he's no longer held in contempt, he still has to serve his 2-year prison sentence. So don't worry, he's going to get out of jail and immediately get hit with tens of millions of dollars worth of fines and payments and payouts and whatnot. Maybe then he can recover those gold coins and rewrite his legacy. And maybe there's another treasure hunter out there, combing through court documents, examining Thompson's research, looking for any clues to where he might have hidden his gold. Remember Mel Fisher, the treasure hunter with whom Thompson worked early in his career? Well, eventually, Fisher found the Atocha shipwreck off the Florida Keys and spent nearly a decade tied up in litigation against the state of Florida to keep the title of the wreck. And he endured similar legal battles as Thompson, some of which reached as high as the U.S. Supreme Court. Ultimately, Fisher and his partners were awarded rights to all the Trend treasure from the Atocha. His, unlike Thompson's, was a case of happily ever after. It's interesting how much Thompson is caught in a monkey's trap. There's stories, and I don't know if this is a real thing, it's just an anecdote I've heard my whole life, that you can catch monkeys by having food in a cage with a small hole for them to slip their hand through. But once the monkey grabs the food and makes a fist, their hand is now too large to pull back out of the hole. The monkey could simply walk away if he just lets go of the food, but the monkey will not let go of the food, meaning he'll sit there and try to pull his closed fist out of the hole until the hunter shows up to catch him. So much of this could have been avoided if Thompson just calmed down. Like, yeah, I could only imagine how frustrating it would be if you spent 5 years trying to find a shipwreck and then insurance companies from the 1800s show up for their cut of the pie. But all he had to do was endure that and then keep getting the gold, and he still would have tens of millions of dollars as well as the artifacts. Like I said, he got 92.5%. And sure, he's got to split all that with investors, but do you know what his 17% of that 92% would have been? More money than he probably ever would have spent. But because he didn't want to give money to the people that gave him money to get here in the first place, because he and his attorneys wanted to argue technicalities and say, oh, they were okay with nothing happening here, which, yeah, they wrote bye-bye on a check and said they'd be fine if nothing came of this. That's with the assumption that you don't find the shipwreck. If they find the shipwreck, then yeah, the investors want their money. But if he would have just paid them what was theirs, everything would have been fine. But because it became his money and his gold and his shipwreck, well, he stuck there. Instead, his collection of gold became a collection of court trouble. We look at the lives of treasure hunters through media like Indiana Jones, The Goonies, or the Uncharted series, but maybe it's not worth all the trouble. Not only do you have to spend years researching, finding investors, braving deadly elements in open waters, as well as navigating the depths with little to no light using expensive equipment, once you do find it, you have to face the scariest monster of all, federal governments. And that might make the cost of finding one's buried treasure just a bit too high. And with that, we have the story of Tommy Thompson's buried treasure, which if he physically buried those 500 coins somewhere, that means that what was once the Central America's buried treasure is now Thompson's buried treasure. So get to finding that. This is such a fascinating case and one that I think deserves to be talked about. Like I said, Tommy gets out of jail in a year. Maybe as soon as he gets out, he'll go get the coins and all these other secret coins he didn't tell anyone about. And maybe he'll be the one laughing and I'll be the one looking stupid as he has money to pay off everyone and like an extra 100 million to buy a missile to blow my house up with. That would actually be crazy if that happened. I wouldn't even be mad. But I feel this is a story of good intentions leading to greed that's too interesting not to talk about. So thank you all for sticking through this with me, and above all else, thank you for watching. I'm so blessed and excited to see how well this channel's done in 2025, and I'm so excited to see where we're going into the new year. Y'all have been great to me and allowed me to put together a fantastic team of wonderful people who make this channel possible. The ones who worked on this video will be credited in the description, so be sure to show them some love. New videos on the way soon, but I believe that should do it for now. Before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! You know what Tommy should have done is when he found the boat, he should have just paid everyone off on the ship. And then they go back to the investors and they're like, oh, you know, couldn't find anything. And then behind them, as they're saying that, there is a very obvious giant sunken ship on the back of a tractor trailer and a mountain of gold. And they're like, oh, that we found that somewhere else on the way here, but we didn't find the thing you paid us for. Sorry about that. That's what I would have done. I'm sure that would have went great.